Hi everyone, it's Raina. So this video is for those people who have their natal Neptune in the 8th house. And this is a very psychically active placement because the person is dealing with an influence of a planet which does not have any boundaries in a house which is all about death, sex, shared resources, and the occult. And so, needless to say, a person with this placement, and especially if there are other things, factors that support it, can, I was thinking of the doors of perception, not remember, because earlier when I was preparing to do this, I was remembering that Jim Morrison and his partner Pam both had this placement of Neptune in the 8th house. And, the doors of perception, that's where the doors got their name. So, it's just now that I'm like kind of connecting the dots. But yeah, and it's interesting because I've been, when I was a teenager, I was the generation after the band existed and was active. But I had Jim Morrison's poster in my bedroom, and I just, worship Jim Morrison. And lately, thanks to the magic of the internet, I'm able to see his performances and see him being interviewed. And sometimes I kind of get the creeps because I feel like he's possessed or that there's something else going on. He's not there in the physical, like he's somewhere else. And this is kind of how Neptune in the 8th house can be very receptive to higher realms, but not necessarily discriminating between them and the entities that can come about because of Neptune. Neptune provides that spiritual link, but it doesn't give discernment. So there can be a lot of confusion about the supernatural experiences that the person is having. In this case, if you have this, you may have a very, ever since you were a child, there may have always been kind of things that go bump in the night around you, or you've had actual visitations and things like that. If your sun sign is and or Mercury is in Earth, this may really bother you because you may think you're crazy. And this is one of the reasons why understanding ourselves to the highest extent and also being willing to be open to these kinds of ideas is so important. If a person is very earthbound and they are, quite stuck on there's nothing, anything that they can't see is not true, then if they still are born with this kind of a placement, they can feel like something isn't quite right. And it's just that they're resisting this kind of thing. For some people, this may be, I was going to use the word channeled, not, as a joke, but this could be channeled into even a career as a channeler or in some capacity of being able to tune into that. However, I think other factors would have to cooperate, like maybe having the moon in conjunction with Neptune or something like that, because Neptune by itself might be a lot more uncontrolled, and that could create, wreak havoc on a person's life, actually, because the person may not know what is true and what is not true. And this can, I just want to, before I continue, I want to give a shout out to the astrocodex.com and also the astrologyplacemembership.com, because these are two sites that I kind of skimmed just to get the basic thing that they were saying and put it in my own words, although I could have probably done it without anything. I just don't like to do that because I feel like they might even be more of an expert than me. That's just how I do things. But I let me just read what the opening paragraph of the Astral Codex and what they say, because rather than paraphrasing it. In case that a native has natal Neptune in the eighth house, he will be a strong receptor of spiritual currents. This is a double-edged knife. The positive side is that he can reach high levels of spirituality and unconditional love through his relationships. The negative is a rather wide spectrum of deception and self-deception. Now, the thing is that because Neptune takes in, they use the term being a sponge, you could say like a psychic sponge, and the sign Pisces too. So if your sun is in Pisces, whoa, and you have Neptune in the eighth house, this can be taking in information, but is the information valid? They talk about deceivers. There could be entities that are feeding information that is not true. And a prime example that I can think of is the Ouija board. The Ouija board is widely, told to people, do not use this object. This will open you up to, negative entities. And I am thinking about my own life. I think there were like 2 times in my life that I was even around a Ouija board. But the second time I actually participated with somebody and had a very strange experience. And, because I'm very skeptical, I felt like the person I was doing it with was pushing the, whatever they call that thing, that you trace the letters and stuff. But, that's just how I am. But after that experience, I had some negative experiences in my life. Now, that was a long, long time ago, so I'm not even sure of the timeline, if I'm correct about that. It seems to me that that's what happened, and I also know another situation where that occurred. And I think that this is a similar thing where, and even this goes for anybody who consults with channelers, psychics, what have you, who are claiming to be, speaking about people who have crossed over, or spiritual teachers who have never incarnated, or whatever they're trying to promote. But that we have to use our discernment and be very careful, because we don't have any proof that these entities are, telling us things that are correct, or if they're telling us disinfo. I was going to say, it's kind of like the mainstream media, Are we being led astray, or are we being led to some kind of a higher truth? And it just makes sense to approach things like that. But this type of person, because they have it in their, their astrological makeup, this is something that comes naturally for them to receive these this information psychically and to believe it, because Neptune can be very gullible. Neptune can deceive itself. Just, which that's what self-deception, that's what gullibility is deceiving oneself. Believing what somebody says, well, I mean, it's, allowing somebody else to influence you. So if your sun is in Pisces especially, which is the sign that Neptune rules, and if your rising sign is Pisces, because then your Neptune is your ruler, you have to look at where is Neptune in the chart. It's in the house, the eighth house. Be very careful. You may have psychic gifts, especially if your sun is in a water sign, or in Aquarius, maybe Sagittarius or Mercury in these signs. You may have these gifts, or the moon, I should say, too. But you have to make sure that you have enough willingness to not just take everything at face value. At the very least, that can go a long way. Now, the other thing that this person can do is be the kind of person who takes advice from others about spiritual matters. So, going into certain types of religions, or I would say even more than organized religion. I mean, Neptune in the ninth house could be more on the organized side of religion, where the deception that occurs there, but with the eighth house, with the occult. So even with the tarot, even with astrology, sometimes, I do tarot readings on YouTube. Some people get really caught up in that. And I know, even though I don't have this placement, I can relate to that to a certain degree, because when I used to watch those readings, I used to be like, oh man, I don't like, how this ended, and then feel like, oh my God, could this really occur in my life? The type of person like you who has this in their eighth house, you're that much more, maybe we could say, vulnerable to this. So you would probably be better off not doing it at all if it affects you this adversely, because messages that are coming, whether it's like a YouTube reading that it's for everybody, which that should just, common sense should say that can't possibly be, directed to me, even if certain things really do seem to add, to line up, and not to get too caught up in that. But with a private reading, and especially if the person is claiming to be a psychic, because they're claiming to be able to get inside of your head, read your thoughts, know your future, and stuff like that. I don't claim anything like that. And I think that even astrology is open-ended enough that nobody should ever take what an astrologer says, even in a private reading, to heart, because it's one interpretation. It's just one interpretation. There are many that could, many possibilities for everything. But talking about people who are, really claiming, and I had an experience. I was always wondering if I would ever have this experience of somebody coming up to me and telling me things as a psychic. And I had somebody walk, I was just walking down the street and they came up to me, and I can't remember even what year that was, if there was something else going on in my life. I have a feeling that there was. I have a feeling that there was something, intense going on in my life, that I attracted this. And even if I thought it was a big, hoax or a big con, I still took that encounter as being something meaningful, in terms of like, hey, your energy is looking for somebody to give you answers. And this is maybe not what you're looking for specifically, but at least the universe is responding, and that can be comforting. Like I said, I don't have Neptune in the eighth house, though. It's important that if you are interested in the occult, and you find people that you feel really know what they're talking about, that you still reserve, that you still reserve, I don't want to say reserve doubt, but that you utilize your own intuition, along with that you don't just give away your power. I think that's the best way of putting it. That you always feel that you are in control of the narrative of your life, and that nobody else. Because some of these people, if they're charlatans, they will really try to take over another person's life. I mean, in terms of like, they want to be the one who has all the answers. That's actually a good way of kind of like a red flag type of a warning that you might be dealing with a charlatan. Because there's also psychics that may be like they're not looking to control anybody. And even those people, you have to make sure that you don't like take in everything they say as true. But if it resonates, for sure. The problem is with a prediction by somebody is that since it hasn't happened yet, it can be easier to believe, and that's kind of like the destructive side of these things. So this is one of the reasons that I do think that in the Bible sometimes we get these trolls, those of us who are astrologers or energy healers, whatever you want to call it, or who are on YouTube or tarot readers or whoever. We get like people quoting the Bible that say, they're kind of trollish because they know exactly what they're doing. There might be some people who really think that they're trying to save souls and things like that, but they quote the Bible about that it's dangerous to consult with these kinds of people. There's a grain of truth in that, because if the person abdicates their sovereignty as a soul because they're believing what somebody is telling them, which may or may not come true, that is dangerous. So what you want to do is you want to practice discernment. If you feel like you're very vulnerable, like you take in everything that somebody says and it becomes your reality, then you have to be very cautious about what you allow into your consciousness in the first place. And that might be readings, that might be movies, because Neptune rules, I think it rules photography, but anything with illusion, fantasy, and certainly movies and music and everything that could have an influence on a person. You have to be especially discerning. And this, often is told to people who are Pisces or have a strong Neptunian influence in other ways because of that tendency, or have planets in the 12th house, that Neptune rules. So, it's kind of like in some cases the person may not know what is real and what is fantasy. Now, even when we talk about schizophrenia, I personally believe that those people are not hallucinating, that they are actually speaking to entities that are disembodied. The problem is that it is very uncontrolled. And because of that, people think that they're crazy and they're screaming in the middle of the street and they're yelling at somebody that everybody else cannot see. And yet, there are other mass delusions, when people agree upon a certain thing, that is, and if it is not real, and that could be very true of our society, that a lot of people are believing in a certain thing, and therefore it becomes their reality. But when you have Neptune in the 8th house, this is taken to a whole new level. Now let's talk about other things that this could involve. Like I said, this can be the house of sex. So sex becomes something spiritual. It can, I read in, wherever I read this, that the 8th house is sex magic. The 5th house is recreational sex. So it's sex, the 5th house is the house of pleasure. Also the house of love, but the pleasurable aspects of sex. House of, conceiving children, too, for what that's worth. But the 8th house, the house that Scorpio rules, is the house of spiritual sex. If the person has Neptune in the 8th house, this can be a person who is a sexual healer. Now, this could come in many kinds of forms. It could be a prostitute. And, I am being 100% serious. I think that prostitution can have a very detrimental negative side, but it can have a positive side for people who don't feel like they have human connection, and they're looking to they have not been able to have it for whatever reason, or they're afraid of it. The sexual healer, or people that are having dysfunction in their sex lives, even if they have a partner, a steady partner. So a sex therapist, the eighth house is a house of psychology and the inner workings of the mind. So that could certainly go along with that does go along with the sexual dysfunction. And, something called, there's a type of yoga called tantric yoga, which is utilizing, and I don't know if it's just sex though. I think it can be other, what we would call like pleasurable things that involves sense gratification that are transmuted like an alchemist into something spiritual and become part of the spiritual path. And I'm not an expert on tantric yoga, but the point is that this person can, see sex as something magical. And on the more mundane level, using masks, costumes, maybe even role playing with sex because of Neptune being about fantasy. So fantasy can be a big thing. Now, of course, again, fantasy can have a very negative, detrimental side to it, where a person is lost in fantasy. I don't know if pornography would fall into this jurisdiction, if you will, but certainly, probably, because I think there's a lot of shame associated with it, and the eighth house is a shadow, and so if Neptune rules photography or video, and we're in sexual, yeah, pornography is probably the domain of the eighth house, and there's a lot of darkness there, I think, and it's a distortion. I think that's the main reason why it's problematic. So, that it takes something that has a purity and turns it into something very dark. Maybe not 100% of the time, but so looking at it from that perspective, I didn't see anything about pornography in any of these things that I read. So this is where I have to, use my own brain and just, kind of think out loud if that could possibly be it. And we're not talking about morality. That's important to note, or like a certain religious teaching that pornography is bad. Nothing. When we look at bad and good, that's too simplistic. But talking about all of these things and the dark, the shadow that it creates. There can be, in some cases, positive benefits to some of these things as well. But our society is so polarized, dualistic, that we can't have these discussions without people wanting to defend their side. This isn't about saying something is good, something is bad. I just said about astrology and about consulting psychics or astrologers. There is the danger, or tarot readers. There's a danger there if you're not centered enough to be able to override it and say, you know what, I don't believe that. I refuse to believe that. And if you have Neptune in the eighth house, I'm just saying, be careful. Take extra precaution. But also take extra precaution with sex. It can be extremely healing, or it can lead you into more diluted territory where you're living in a fantasy and not really connected. And depending on how, on a person's life, and if they feel very disconnected, fantasies can get more and more intense and extreme. And in order for, and talking about especially with the sexual side of things, in order to get that same, to generate that same type of sensation, that the person gets into more and more extreme stuff. So this is why we have to, you know, look at, there's a positive side to fantasy, or creativity. Creativity is a form of fantasy. And it's not bad, but everything, Frankenstein's monster, uh, you know, maybe it started out with a good intention, but, things can go awry. So the other area that I wanted to cover is about money and the eighth house. So shared resources. A lot of, with this sort of thing, there can be deception that is swirling around you, connected to, for instance, inheritance. That's a big eighth house money thing, because death plus money, other people's money, equals inheritances. Maybe you're at greater risk of getting swindled by an inheritance, regarding an inheritance, where they try to not even let you know that it's there, or try to change it, so that you get less. Maybe you're supposed to get a certain amount of money, and they were able to trick somebody into doing something, and you get less money than you should. You have to be careful when it comes to loans, when it comes to incurring debt, because somebody, or if you want to talk about, they mention on Codex Astrology, institutions, what institutions? Obviously, like banks, I'm assuming, that try to get you to go into debt and then you can't repay it. Those kinds of things. And they mention, like with inheritances, mischievous lawyers. Well, that might be a bit of a redundancy, right? No, I'm just kidding. So you have to be careful too, about your taxes, that you make sure that you are up to date, because it could even be something that you that you overlooked, that you really weren't trying to cheat anybody, and then you have legal problems and stuff like that. So the other thing too, if you have a significant other, and or even, I guess you could even say like a business partner, anybody that you deal with money. So those are the two big ones that I can think of. A significant other, even if you have separate bank accounts, that probably is a good thing not to do, is to have a joint bank account. I don't give advice, but I'm just putting it out in the universe, because that other person might lie about what their spending, habits are, and all of a sudden you log onto your account and you're like, whoa, what happened to the money? I just think that joint accounts are crazy anyway. Even if you really trust a person, I don't see the point of them. But I don't, then again, I don't see the point of a lot of things that most people do. So, but the other area is like if you have a business partner, and that person is, you give them money and tell them, hey, could you go and buy our supplies, and they go and do something else with it. So that can, obviously, you have to really, at the end of the day, depend mostly on yourself when it comes to your own finances. And if if you really must take out a loan, you better look at it with a fine-tooth comb, make sure that it's on point, because there could be some kind of like deceptive things. I mean, I think there are a lot of us out here, even that don't have this placement, are nervous about signing contracts because, if there's a lot of small print, how do you know that it's not going to screw you over? So, those kinds of things. But I think I covered enough, for this particular sign. I've talked for a half hour, so I'm going to just leave it there. I hope that you enjoyed this and that it resonated. And if you would like a private reading, I offer all kinds of astrological and tarot readings as well. You can check me out at RenaMoonAstrology.com, and the link is below. Take care. Bye.